All righty. So we're gonna start letting people in. If there's probably people that are watching this that are tired of me saying it, but it's one of those things when I open a webinar, I always feel like I'm standing in the store and flinging the doors open, and here comes all the people. So virtually all the people are coming into the room now. So welcome and thank you for joining us this morning on a Saturday morning here on the west coast of California. But Peter, welcome.
Hi, Julie.
And you are actually calling in from where and what time is it there?
Calling from Jersey in the Channel Islands. So it's old Jersey as opposed to New Jersey. We're the southernmost point of the British Isles. And it's currently 5 o'clock in the afternoon here. And if you can hear wind whistling, it's because we had a hurricane and tornado on Thursday night, Friday morning, and we still got the aftermath going on. So if I suddenly disappear, you'll know I've been blown a couple of miles away.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that. But we're going to find out a little bit later and then talk about where you're sitting and what's behind you and where your office is actually located, which is fascinating. And Maddie, where are you calling in from today?
I am calling in from Orange County in Southern California that has no weather.
None.
Zero. We have no weather.
No, it varies. I think does the temperature vary maybe 10 degrees one
maybe.
side or the other? Maybe.
And we occasionally get a Santa Ana wind, but nothing like what Peter described. So nothing. Yes, yeah. We have the most boring weather in the world here.
And so. I always wonder how weather people keep their jobs in Southern California. Just saying. that's a whole other topic. But
yes, exactly. Right. I think there was a Steve Martin movie where he was the weatherman and said the weather the same way all the time, except for the day that it was a hurricane. So yes.
Yeah. And they better be on their toes on that one for sure. Okay, so today in the chat, I am going to be putting in how to order Peter's new book, Stop Them Dead. And so that if you're here in the San Diego area, we would love for you to stop by the store and pick up the book from us. If you're watching this live on the webinar, it'll be in the chat. If you're watching the recording on YouTube or on Facebook later, I'll put that link in there as well. We can always ship it to you wherever you are at. If you're watching on the webinar today, if you scroll down below your screen, you're going to see a Q&A button. If we'd love to have audience questions, so go ahead and pop those in there. Maddie and Peter are going to talk for about 30-ish minutes, and then I'll come back on and take whatever questions you have for Peter or Maddie. So go ahead and pop those in there, or if you want to put them in the chat, that's fine too. So let me introduce these wonderful two people that have joined us here today, and I'll get off this screen and get the show going. Known for his fast-paced and gripping stories that thrust regular people into extraordinary situations, Peter James has proven himself to be one of the world's most successful writers, delivering #1 bestsellers time and time again. His Superintendent Roy Grace books have been translated into 38 languages with worldwide sales of over 21 million copies. Yes, you heard that, 21 million. Amazing. He has enjoyed 19 Sunday Times #1 bestsellers, which is another amazing feat. The first two novels in the Roy Grace series, Dead Simple and Looking Good Dead, have been adapted for television. Okay, like I said, he's here today to talk about his latest, Stop Them Dead, with Maddie Margarita. Maddie hosts Lit Up OC, a popular monthly writer salon in Southern California, and the Southern California Writers Association Hump Day Book Tour broadcast live on Facebook every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Tune into that. A teaching artist at the Museo, is it Museo?
Museum, correct.
Museum and Cultural Center in Anaheim, California. She serves on the board of the Southern California Writers Association and is president of Sisters in Crime Orange County. Her stories can be found in It's All in the Story, California, and Blood Fiction, both anthologies of short fiction. You two have a great conversation, and I'll see you in about a half hour.
Hey, Julie. Thank you. Well, Peter, I guess it's just you and I. And my first question, you and I and a million other people who are watching this. My first question is, how does it feel promoting the 19th book in the Roy Grace series? And is it different promoting the book and now that it's taken on, or the character, now that it's taken on a life of its own?
That's a really good question because now the television series is filming. In fact, we've just finished filming the 12th episode, and they're 2 hour kind of standalone movies. And when I started writing, because I in the Roy Grace series, it's a similar set of characters in the police in each book. So I always tell each story from three perspectives. I tell it from the perspective of the villain, the offender, the perspective of the victim, and the perspective of the police, which is Roy Grace and his team. So I always start with Roy Grace and his team, and I sit down and I go, "Hi, Roy, how are you doing today? How's any news on your missing wife?" And I'll say, "Hi, Glenn Branson, who's his number two." I say, "How's your train crash of a love life?" And then Norman Potting is his politically incorrect detective. I say, "No, Norman, who've you upset this week?" And I kind of go through the characters. And promoting them now, I've actually got the characters not just in my head, but my fans and the viewers on television. It's in America, I think it's on BritBox, can actually see what the characters really look like. And I find that quite helpful. And I love talking about my work. One of the things that I always say when I'm promoting my books is that I write the way that I like to read. And I think I'm quite similar to most of us, and I tend to read in bed at night and I'm tired. So I love relatively short sentences and short chapters. I know if I'm in bed and I pick up a book and the next chapter is 53 pages long, I think, "Oh, I'll have that tomorrow." But if it's only 2 pages, I'll read that. Then, next chapter is only a page and a half. Next thing I know, it's 3 in the morning and I'm still reading. And I love to talk about how I try and make my books fun and easy to read as well as gripping.
I think I was curious when the adaptation took place. Were you involved in that? And did they make any changes or alterations that you were surprised about? And did it impact your writing going forward, or has it?
I wrote the first Roy Grace novel back in 2003-4, and we've had loads of approaches to adapt. Luckily, the first book was kind of a huge success, much to my amazement. And I determined, because my own background is in film and television before I wrote full time, and I know how easy it is to mess up a book or a series. So I was determined that Roy Grace was never going to come to television unless it was going to be made properly. I'd rather it was never made than made badly. And we kissed a lot of frogs over the next sort of 12 years. And then ITV came along, and with a producer who I really liked and I'd worked with in the past and respected. And the first thing they did was throw an amazing bombshell at me in a really good way. They said, "What would you think about John Sim playing Roy Grace?" And I just sat there and I said, if I had been asked to do a police identikit of what Roy Grace looked like when I created him back in 2003, it would be John Sim.
Wow.
So that was a really happy moment. And similarly with Glenn Branson, who's played by Richie Campbell, is exactly as back in 1993, I was put in the police. I go out with the police regularly in England because I need to keep up to speed with them, and police change faster than probably any other organization. So I go out with them regularly to try just to not just keep up to speed, but I get stories from them, and just their general banter. And I remember getting in the car with this really tall, black, bald cop. And he was 32. And I said, "Oh, yeah, how long have you been in the police?" And he said, "Oh, I've only been 2 weeks. I'm 2 weeks out of what they call probation. They do their training, then they do probation where they go out with another cop before they can go out on their own." And I said, "Really?" I said, "So you went and felt it'd been late?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I was a nightclub dancer. And then my kid was born. And I looked down at my kid and I thought, one day you're going to go to school. Somebody's going to ask you what your dad does for a living. And I want you to be able to say something you're proud of." And I joined the police. And he is exactly how I kind of imagined him. And it's the same with all the cast. It's quite extraordinary. Somebody said to me, "You must feel like God because we were all in your head and now we're all standing in front of you."
What,
And I
what,
think
what was the most exciting part of that for you?
I think the most exciting part was the day that the first one was broadcast, and my wife Laura and I watched it live on television, and I had tears in my eyes. I saw Grace come up on the screen, and it was like the culmination of so many years of wanting it to happen, but wanting it to happen well, and it's been made better than I could have even hoped. I'm absolutely thrilled. And I had a meeting with ITV this week, and I learned that we are the only British drama series, returning series, where the viewing figures are going up. So
Well, and I saw that it was by the series 4, and it's called Grace. Is that correct? If people are
correct.
looking for it, Grace.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, I mean, obviously, you've written a character and created a character that people connect with, and I'm sure you've talked to thousands of fans who tell you what they like, and probably a few who tell you what they don't like over the years. So what is it about Roy Grace that you think has hooked the imagination or makes him so relatable to so many people, so many different people?
I think back in 1997, I was spending a day at Brighton Police Station in Sussex, and somebody said, "Oh, there's a young homicide detective you might like to meet." And I went into this office, and I've never seen an office so untidy. It was covered in blue and green crates, bulging with manila folders. And it's like I could just see this balding head at the back. And I said, "Oh, are you moving?" And he said, "No." He said, "I'm a homicide detective, but I've just been tasked with reopening all the unsolved murders in Sussex, where somebody is still alive who could benefit from the investigation. Each one of these crates contains the principal case file of that unsolved murder. I am the last chance the victim has for justice and the family has for closure." And I love that human image about him. And he said to me, "What are you writing at the moment?" And I was writing a psychological thriller called Denial. And he said, "Tell me about it." I started telling him. He said, "Hang on a sec. Why isn't your detective doing this? And I don't think your character would have done that. Why don't you have an outside inquiry team looking at it?" I thought, wow. And he had this thing. We became friends, and he helped me with that book and then with this next book I wrote. His name was Dave Gaylor, and he rose up through the ranks and got promoted to detective chief superintendent, basically head of major crime for the county of Sussex. And this was in 2002. My publisher said, "Have you ever thought of creating a detective as a central character?" So I went to Dave and I said, "How would you like to be a fictional cop?" And he loved it. We've worked together on every book since. He was best man when Laura and I got married in 2015, and he's my best mate today. And what it is about him that Roy Grace doesn't look like him, but in terms of how he behaves and acts, Dave is something I've noticed. What makes a really good detective, particularly a homicide detective, is two completely opposing character traits. Firstly is you have to be anal, because every homicide is a massive puzzle, has to be painstakingly pieced together. But at the same time, where detectives really make progress is by having a very high level of empathy and bonding with the victim's family. That's where they learn so much stuff from, and genuinely caring. They tend to be surprisingly hard, but also soft-centered people to get there. And I always joke, and I say that if I was unlucky enough to have a member of my family murdered, Roy Grace is the detective I'd want running the case. And I get at least one fan letter a week saying Roy Grace is the only detective I've ever wanted to sleep with. I take that as a compliment.
Well, see what I mean about writing relatable characters. But I think you have a well-deserved reputation for not only writing accurate procedure novels from a police perspective in an accurate way, but also in a very empathetic and human way, which is not to be believed if you look at all those heads behind you with hats on them. So how do you go about doing both? I mean, human beings are complex, and you do such a good job in all your characters, not just Roy, but in Chloe and your other characters, of not only drawing them fully and making us want them to be our friends, and antagonists, our enemies. But how do you do that? Is there a trick? Is there Is there a technique? How do you do that?
Something I learned a long time ago, and I saw it in some of my favorite writers. You know, Graham Greene was a big influence on me when I was a kid. And the important thing is you must love your characters, even the villains. And if you think of, if you think about the greatest villains in history, about Frankenstein, he's a monster, but you feel empathy for him because he says to Dr. Frankenstein, his creator, I didn't want to exist. You made me. Dracula, he's a monster, but actually he's got a lot of charm. And if you look at, say, a modern villain like Hannibal Lecter, the
My
guy
favorite. Yeah.
he's a monster, but we smile. And when he goes off at the end of Silence
We're
of the Lambs,
rooting for him.
yeah, he's going to have an old friend for dinner with a nice piano.
He really means it.
Yeah. So it's really important we read books. I always think there's an inseparable trinity when you write a book of character, research, and plot. And I put them in that order because we read books, first and foremost, to find out what happens to characters that we engage with. Books are all about characters. And if you have a great enough character, they could be reading the phone book for 300 pages and you'd still be hooked. Research is also important because people who read are smart. Everyone who reads is intelligent. And I think we don't just want a page-turning story. We want to learn something about the author's experience of life or the subject the author's writing about. And then I put plot at the bottom because plot obviously is important. But if you don't care about the characters, if you don't believe the author knows what he or she is writing about, you won't read on. So it's really important to have that combination of really empathetic characters. And I try to really make the villains empathetic. And I love giving. I get a lot of that from, I work for a charity. I'm an ambassador for a charity called the Reading Agency, which tries to encourage prisoners in prisons in England, in the UK, to read and write, because the average reading age, 60% of the inmates of British prisons is below 11 years old. So I give talks in prisons and I learned so much. I mean, I had wonderful character I got straight out of a women's prison about 10 years ago. I was giving this talk and there's this one woman in the audience, and in women's prisons in England, they wear their own clothes, and she had a very posh voice like this. And she kept asking me questions, interrupting, saying, can you tell me about William Thackeray a little bit, and Hemingway and Faulkner? And I think, I'm getting out of my depth here. Anyway, I thought, I must find out what you're in for. And my guess was maybe she'd kill somebody drink driving, something like that. So I made a beeline for her at the end. And it's never etiquette to say, what have you done? I always have an opener. I say, how much longer do you have to go? And she looked at me and she said, 9.5 more bloody years. And it's just not fair. As a woman did exactly what I did in London, she's only got 6 more years. I said, oh, what brought you in here? I poisoned my mother-in-law, the old bag. Okay. She said, well, the thing was, she went into hospital to die. So I embezzled her bank account. And the bloody woman didn't die. I realized she was coming back home and she'd find out. So I thought I'd better poison her. Then I realized my husband would find out. So I thought I'd better poison him too. And it's just not fair. A woman done exactly what I did in London. She's only got 6 more years. I was being taken out. I said to the prison officer, I said, is that woman for real? He said, oh, yes, sir. Husband was 3 months on life support. He's got permanent brain damage. And she's just bitter about the length of her sentence. And I thought, you are going to be a character in a future book. And I did. I made a character called Jodie Bentley in a novel about a Black widow I wrote called Love You Dead.
I think there are a lot of people who could probably relate to her and her crimes. But let's talk a little bit about Stop Them Dead. You have created antagonists and villains in this story that it's hard to give them any redeeming value. So, or consider them having any redeeming value. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the story and what inspired you to write it and how you came up with these, with the whole plot.
Thank you. Stop Them Dead starts with a farmer and his wife waking up in the middle of the night, and they're struggling with their farm. And due to the rise in value of dogs in lockdown, they've got one good source of income, which is they've just had a breed of French bulldog puppies, which are going to be, they're all sold pending their inoculations for a really good price. And they wake up in the middle of the night and they hear the sound of a break-in. look out the window and there's two vehicles and there are shadows. They've got a barn door open and they are stealing the dogs. The farmer goes out to confront them, and 5 minutes later is lying dying. And Roy Grace and his team come in to investigate. And Roy discovers through this crime that dog crime has just exploded during lockdown, which it really did. And the whole idea for the book, and the story goes on from there, and it's told through three strands, through Roy Grace investigating the murder of the farmer, through a young couple who desperately want a puppy for their 7-year-old daughter and do all the wrong things in the way they buy it.
Well, Peter, you are just pulling on everybody's heartstrings right now.
My wife and I are massive dog lovers. And the whole idea for the book came about 2.5 years ago when I was reading the local paper in Brighton, and a woman walking her dog, a Springer Spaniel breeding bitch, in a park in the city, was mugged and the dog was stolen. And I thought, what's that about? And then I read on. It said this dog was worth £5,000. That's about $7,000. And I thought, bad enough to be mugged and lose a watch or your phone or wallet or handbag or whatever. But a dog, for me, that's like a child. I would be beyond heartbroken. We have a whole menagerie of animals which we utterly adore. And I've always actually, we kind of jokingly always make villains characters who don't like dogs in my books, because my wife and I have always said we can't really like anyone who hates dogs. But I had a meeting with the chief of police by coincidence about a week later, and I told her about this piece I'd read in the paper. I said, what's that about? She said, that is seriously the tip of the iceberg. Everybody wanted a lockdown dog. Price of dogs has gone up 10 times, and organized crime gangs have realized they can make more money out of dogs, out of illegally importing dogs, out of illegally breeding them and literally stealing them, either by mugging people or breaking into properties. They can make more money than drugs. If they're caught with drugs, they're looking at 5 to 20-year prison sentences. The maximum sentence for any crime involving dogs is 6 months. So it's a no-brainer. And that's what gave me the idea, and as a dog lover, and also I'm a patron of the Royal Society for Protection of Animals in England. And they wanted the message got out about just how to avoid buying a dog from a villain. And they are very unscrupulous. I have a scene in the book when the characters like Fat Roy Grace, and they go to look at a puppy, and they arrive at they look, well, it's a beautiful house, lovely grounds, and something's not quite right, and they don't buy it. They're in the car with a very disappointed kid driving back. Roy Grace says, did you notice there are no pictures anywhere in the house? We didn't see the dog's mother. They were trying to force us to buy it then and there for cash. It hasn't had its inoculations. And what people do is they rent an Airbnb house, make it look really nice, like they've been living there forever. You turn up, buy the puppy for them, you take it home. It's probably been brought up in a puppy farm. It's almost certainly going to have picked up some illnesses. It won't have had any vaccinations, and you get it home, it gets sick. You phone up, the phone's dead, and they've gone. And you're facing horrific vet bills if the poor dog survives at all. So I want to highlight this into a thriller.
That's terrible. I mean, and I think if I were a villain, I would rather face a jury with a car full of drugs than a car full of puppies. Because, like you said, those people have no socially redeeming value. So and I think that's one thing about your books that I really enjoy, is that the villains are worthy of Roy Grace.
Thank you.
That's a skill and an art in itself. So how do you, what kinds of stories are Roy Grace stories, and what kind of villains are Roy Grace villains?
I try to make the villains engaging, like in Stop Them Dead. I have this one villain who's like basically employed by this illegal puppy farmer who's a horrible big thug. And this character is called Gecko, kind of strange looking guy. And he his method of operation. Every villain has their own MO, their own method of operation. And particularly, he likes to keep a spider in his mouth. And if he goes up to someone and he shocks them by opening his mouth, he steals a couple of watches from a shop by literally doing that and shopping, and the jeweler just is gobsmacked. And it's like his party trick. And he is not a completely horrible person. He's got a girlfriend who's blind, and he takes care of her. So he's on one half a monster, on the other half he's a kind of decent guy. I try to make all my characters have some redeeming feature, except a very few of them. Another villain I had in my previous novel, in Picture You Dead, he was a burglar that I met some years ago, and his speciality was...
You have some very interesting friends, Peter. I just have to stop you there and comment, but I'm sorry, go on.
I find you get a lot out of villains if you kind of talk to them as ordinary people, and they like showing off as well. And I remember this guy was telling me that his speciality was country houses, and what he'd always do is he would catch a crow. He'd watch a house for about 2 weeks. He'd get the pattern of the owners. And then the night he was going to do his burglary, he'd turn up and sit outside, wait till they'd gone to bed. And he said, you can see when people have gone to bed, particularly in winter, you get condensation on the windows when the temperature in the bedroom drops. He said, then what he'd do is first of all, he'd smash a downstairs window, then he'd throw the crow in. It'd be a dead crow, and it would set the alarm off, and the house owner would come down, go, oh, a damn bird gone through the window. He wouldn't bother to phone the alarm company to come and reset the alarm. It's 1 a.m, leave it till the morning. Of course, they go back up to bed, and now my character is in the house. Yeah, it's clever. I mean, a lot of these villains, they are smart people. If they'd chosen an honest profession, they'd probably have a much better life and be very successful.
I think it's those kinds of details and stories that make your books unique. All of your books feel very different to me. I haven't read all 19 yet, but I'm halfway through.
Wow.
And they all feel different and unique, but they still have the connecting thread, the Roy Grace thread. But I'm also interested in your standalones that you've written. So I have a question. As a writer, is it easier for you to write a standalone or harder to write a standalone?
It's a really great question. I think to give an overall answer to that, I remember when I was a kid, and I was an avid reader because my sister was 7 years younger, so I was effectively an only child for many years. And so my big thing was reading. And a lot of the authors that I really loved, I'd find that as they got more successful, their books were going to get fatter and less exciting. And I always sort of made a promise that I would try to raise the bar. If I ever had any success, if I was ever lucky enough to be able to make a living as a writer, I would try and raise the bar with every book I wrote. And I do that, whether it's a Roy Grace novel or a standalone. I want each book to be more special and better than the previous ones. The Roy Grace ones have one set of difficulties in writing them, in that I've got to deal with all the different developments of the characters. So I've got to stay within, Roy's love life and Glenn Branson and EJ and all the characters in the book. So I've got that. On the other hand, at least I've got characters already established. The hardest thing, as I'm sure you know as a writer, is writing characters. But with the standalones, there's certain stories and subjects that I can't explore in a Roy Grace novel that I want to in a standalone. I wrote a novel about designer babies called Perfect People, and that wouldn't have worked as a Roy Grace novel. I wrote a thriller called Absolute Proof about what would happen if somebody had claimed they had absolute proof that God existed, and how that would...
Writing that down.
I had a phone call in 1989 out of the blue from this guy, elderly sounding guy. He said, "Is that Peter James, the author?" And I said, yes. This was before I was ex-director. He said, thank God I found you. It's taken me 2 weeks. So I phoned every Peter James in the phone book. I go, okay. He said, I'm not a lunatic. He said, I was a bomber navigator in the Second World War. I'm a retired university professor. I have absolute proof that God exists. And I've been told on the highest authority that you are the person to help me get taken seriously.
I just got goosebumps. That
was the starting
wild, Peter.
And I wrote that in the beginning of Absolute Proof, I wrote an introduction explaining how this all came about and how I met this guy. And he really wasn't a loony. He was a very charming guy. And he basically, his wife was also a university lecturer, and she died of cancer. And before she died, she had made him promise that he would go to a medium. He wasn't religious, go to a medium and try and communicate with her. And he did this a few months after she died. And instead of his wife coming through, a male came through who said he was a representative of God and that God was extremely concerned about the state of the world and felt that if mankind could have faith in him reaffirmed, it would get us back on an even keel. And he said, he gave me 3 pieces of information nobody on earth knows and said, the writer Peter James is the person who will help you get taken seriously. So big ask, you know.
Big responsibility, Peter.
Yeah, I felt it. It took me 29 years to write the book. I came about 5 years ago.
I think hopefully everybody has gotten a feel for the scope of your talent and your interests. And I mean, it's very difficult in the short period of time that we have. I would love to talk to you longer. You have fascinating stories and such a well-rounded approach to delivering these stories. And I believe you're either a born storyteller or you're not. And you are a storyteller. And I hope that people will take that to heart and buy your books. But I have one final question before we kind of turn this over is, do you think about what your readers will feel at the end of a book? And do you have a hope or an expectation for them of what they get when they finish the last word in your book and they close the book, how they feel?
That's a good question, Maddie. I think the 2 most important lines in a book, in a novel, are the first line and the last. Because the first line, to me, sets up the feel of a book. You know, and I think books do have a feel. And I think the last line, the last page, will determine whether your reader will ever read another of your books or not. I always want my readers that when they get to that last page, the last line, to go either yes, wow, or yikes. I want to create an emotion in them, a reaction, like either I didn't see that coming or a big smile. You know, I write dark stories, but I always want to try and leave my readers feeling when they close the book that the world is maybe a slightly better place than when they first opened it. You know, that Roy Grace has put the world back into order. I want to try and leave readers with a feel-good sensation, however dark the story has been.
We could all use more of that,
particularly now. Yeah.
That was a great, Maddie, you are so right. I could sit here and listen to stories, Peter, that you tell all day long. The woman that poisoned her, I mean, that truly is when life is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, you couldn't make that up. I mean, somebody would say, no, they wouldn't. No.
The hard part is, like I said, I related to her. So that's the scary part for me. No, my mother-in-law, I love my mother-in-law.
But I call mine the mother-in-law from hell, but jokingly, she loves it.
We're in big trouble, Peter, if this ever gets played in court. So
yeah, I won't tell on you. I won't tell on you.
I'm pleading the fifth. I don't know anything about what's going on here. Julie. I don't know. I know nothing. And the absolute proof, I mean, honestly, because I'm imagining of all the 19 books and all your standalones that there's just a juicy, delicious story behind each of them and how you came to them. So yeah. Okay, so we have a question from Anonymous. I love Anonymous. Says, I'm going to be a new reader of your books. Is there one in particular she or he should start with?
Well, I think the Roy Grace series are basically, so far, there's 19 books. They are standalones, but each one has an evolving story of some of the different characters. So when we first meet Roy Grace in Dead Simple, which is the first book, we learn that he's coming up to his 39th birthday. He's a very effective homicide detective. But 9 years ago, on his 30th birthday, his wife, Sandy, who he loved, adored, worshipped, vanished off the face of the earth. He literally came home ready to go out to dinner with her and some friends, and she was gone. And for 9 years, whilst he's been searching high and low for her, continuing to work as an effective detective, he doesn't know what happened to her. Did she run off with a lover? Did she get murdered? Did she have an accident? Did she take her own life? And he's even gone to mediums, to clairvoyants, to see if he can get any answers. And then, so that in Dead Simple is the first, and that sets up the mystery. And then in each of the subsequent novels, I seed a little bit more in about what might have happened, and that maybe Sandy wasn't quite the idyllic wife he had always thought. So we get to know a little bit more and a little bit more with each book. So if you read the Roy Grace novels in sequence, you get the benefit of that, but you can pick them up at any point. And then in terms of my standalones, I love them all. Perfect People, I love. Absolute Proof is a book that I guess is one of the books as I said, I spent 29 years writing, so my heart and soul's in that.
I wrote
that down. Absolute Proof.
Me too, Maddie. Maddie, I wrote that one down too. It's like it's on my little notes right here. That one I will be getting as soon as we get off of here.
Right.
So, and I apologize if Maddie, if you and Peter already discussed this, because I was doing some tech stuff in the background. Peter, is Roy aging? And what are you doing about him aging?
Great question. When I originally, our publishers asked, they gave me a 2-book contract. They said, had I ever thought of creating a detective as a central character? And I had a 2-book deal. And I didn't know that it would run. I'm writing the 20th now. I didn't know it would run that long. So I thought I'll set up the mystery of Sandy in book 1 and solve it in book 2. So book 2 started pretty soon after book 1. So we had Dead Simple as the first book, then Looking Good Dead as the second. And that started fairly soon after Dead Simple ended. And then I thought to myself, quite a few writers, they write like it's a book a year and they age their detective. And I thought, well, if that happens, Roy's now, he's coming up to 40, it's 20 books, he'll be retirement age for police officers in England is around early 50s. I thought, so no, I'm going to play with time. So each book starts a few days, few weeks, occasionally a couple of months after the last one ends, but I move them forward culturally. So Roy Grace has gone from coming up to 39, and the 20th book I'm now writing, he's 43. But the book I'm writing is set in 2022, whereas the first novel was set in 2005.
Right.
He's aging just like me, Peter. So how I would hope to age. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, you should see my portrait in the attic. That's the end.
Okay, Dorian Gray. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, because that's the hard part about it, is because technology changes, all of the things as far as detectives, what their tools have to change and have to keep up.
Oh,
I'm curious. You brought up that up, Julie. So, Peter, they were using drones in the book. Did you do the research on that, or?
Yeah, I did. I actually went out with a police drone controller just to see how they do it, because it's interesting with technology. Police and villains are constantly playing a game of catch up with each other. The villains often have the technological advantage, then the police get it, then something else. And technology has made life both easier and harder for villains. One of the things in England in particular that we've had, I think, a long time before America, because of privacy laws in America, was CCTV cameras. If you spend a day in London, you're going to be filmed 2,000 times. So the police have got very good ways now of tracking villains So villains have to be doubly smart in terms of how they operate. And COVID was a godsend for them because they could wear masks
Right.
and cover that idea. But all of the, I mean, I remember back in it was about 15 years ago, and I was at a meeting at Brighton Police Station, which is like the hub of the city of Brighton and Hove, which is a big seaside city. And it's always been known as one of the UK's crime capitals, luckily for me. It was Graham Greene wrote his novel Brighton Rock there in 1937. And in 1932, Brighton was called the murder capital of the UK and the slaughtering queen of Europe. And it's always had a dark side to it, like a lot of great cities do have. And I remember the commander of Brighton Hove said to me, this was 15, 16 years ago, he said, they have a morning meeting. They call it morning prayers. He said, but all the inspectors sit around and they discuss everything that's happened in the city in the last 24 hours, burglaries, rapes, attacks, vehicle theft, whatever. And the commander turned to me and said, you come on a historic day, Peter. This is the first day since records began. There's not been an overnight domestic burglary in the city of Brighton and Hove. And I said, great, you won the war on crime. And he just laughed. And he said, today's villains, he said, they don't want to be out in the middle of the night shinning up, climbing up drain pipes, trying to steal Georgian silver. Everyone's got burglar alarms now. They got dogs. They stay up later. They can make much more money out of drugs or internet. He said, I guarantee you, internet fraud is going to be the future of crime. And boy, is he right. I mean, about 3 months ago, a fan mailed me and said, I didn't know you had a business in Florida. And there was Peter James Real Estate in Florida selling timeshares. And it had
so busy, Peter.
I'm so busy. Photographs of myself, Laura, my wife, our dogs, our alpacas, our pygmy goats. My family make the Queen's gloves, so her royal warrant above it. So if either of you, Julie, Maddie, you want a timeshare in Tallahassee or Orlando, send me a check after the show.
I'll
You'll
get
write on
Peter.
that for us. You'll get that commission. Well, that would be because I mean we alluded to it a little bit, and we have one more question coming in. We alluded a little bit to it, but Peter's actually in a 75-foot tower is where he does his writing. And I just love the picture of that in my head of what that looks like. So just imagine what that looks like where Peter is. I think you need to stay there so people don't keep turning.
We've got a police officer guarding us.
There you go. I love it. Okay, final question coming in from Anonymous again, which I love our anonymous questions. As an aspiring writer, I'm wondering if Peter has written anything about the writing process.
Well, it's interesting. I have on my website, we have an area called the authors. We have a writer's pack. If you go to my website, which is peterjames.com, there's a contact email there. If you email, we can send you a writer's pack, which gives all kinds of ideas and resources. I also have, and this I think would definitely interest you, I have a YouTube channel, and on my YouTube channel, I've got an area called the Authors Studio, and I have interviewed about 130, 140 authors, ranging from Lee Child, Kathy Reichs, big name George R.R. Martin, down to kind of lesser known authors, with asking them 10 questions about how they write. Do they have any rituals? Where do they get their ideas from? And loads of different ideas. There's a wonderful one from John Lescrow on there when he was writing Ritual. He has to reorganize his sock cupboard before he can start writing.
I think that's procrastination.
Yes, I would say that's the best productive procrastination technique I've heard of.
I love that. I'm writing that down too, peterjames.com, because I want to go look at some of those interviews, because that's how you've had me taking notes, which is a good thing when I'm taking notes too.
There are some really good ones there. There's some really valuable ones. I think Lee Child is great on it, but there's loads. Yeah. I've got Joe Finder. There's Bob Stein, R.L. Stein. There's a whole raft of writers on there.
I think I saw Michael Conley on there too.
Yeah, Michael's on there.
Michael's
Yeah.
coming to town. He's coming to San Diego on Wednesday. So
Is he?
get to sit down with Michael.
He's such
on
a
Wednesday.
nice guy. He's such, say hi to him. He's such a lovely guy.
He's so lovely. And I'm just going to have one final question to wrap up, because I think it's fascinating, because you've come up with 19 books and more with your standalones. Titles. Do titles drive you insane, or do you like have them right out of the chute?
It's a really hard thing is getting the right title. And the Roy Grace novels all have dead in the title.
Okay.
It's Dead If You Don't, Love You Dead, Stop Them Dead, Picture You Dead, Dead Simple, of course, Looking Good Dead. And we have a big whiteboard in my office. Anyone who comes in is invited to write down a title with dead in it.
Good
It's
idea.
a delivery person.
Right. Anybody. And
And
we're
I
even
tried-
You climb those
book signings.
75 steps.
Up the 75, yeah, they come 72 steps up to get to the
72.
office. Then they gasp for several minutes, and
Yeah.
then I give them a talk. They can you write a title on the blockboard. But titles are really important. I think their titles, again, they give you that feel. And I try, one of my rules is I don't ever want to knowingly have a title on a book that has been used before.
Mm.
So I try always to have something completely kind of fresh. In my early days, my early standalone novels before, way back, I wrote supernatural thrillers and then psychological thrillers. And I had one word titles. I had Possession.
Mm.
And of course, A.S. Byatt came out with Possession. I had Alchemist. That came out. I had Twilight. You can't, there's no copyright in the title. So when I created Roy Grace, I thought, okay, I'm going to come up with at least 2-word titles. So if anybody else uses it, it will look like a direct copy. So that's where kind of Dead Simple had never been used. So I used that and went on from there.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, Peter, it has been wonderful hearing you talk today. Maddie, an excellent conversation. Peter's given us the his website to go to. I'm assuming that your social media handles are on there. Do you play in the social media world very often?
Yes, I do. I've got my website, which is obviously www.peterjames.com. I've got Twitter, which is @PeterJamesUK, or X, @PeterJamesUK, Instagram, the same.
Yep.
And we have a Facebook page as well.
Perfect. Well, fans can find you and get all up to date on everything that's happening.
And we love hearing from fans too. So if anybody wants to contact me, please feel free. We always love it.
Excellent. So they can do that on your website, right? They can write to you on your website.
Yeah, there's a contact email on the website on peterjames.com.
Perfect. And Maddie, if people want to find out more about you and what you're up to and find out about your 10 o'clock, I'm fascinated by your 10 o'clock Facebook every Wednesday. So tune into that. So where should they find info about that?
The Hump Day interview.
The Hump Day.
You can find out information about me on MaddieMargarita.com, and it's MADDIE Margarita.com. And I also am on Facebook at Maddie Margarita, and also Instagram.
Perfect.
And Maddie writes.
Maddie writes.
Can I just say, Maddie, you just a great interview. I really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. You're so gracious and so interesting to talk to. And like I said, it's, I thought, oh my God, a half an hour. And then a half an hour went by in a heartbeat. So I'd love to talk to you anytime, anywhere. So.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
Fantastic. Again, Peter's book can be ordered from Warwick's. Thank you all for joining in, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thanks, Julie. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.